A homeless boy saves a millionaire's daughter from a burning building, risking his life to carry her to safety while flames tear through the walls around them. But instead of being thanked, he's accused and locked away. That's when the millionaire sees a photo the boy was hiding, and everything he thought he knew about his past begins to unravel. Because this boy isn't just a stranger, he might be the son of the woman who once saved his life. What secret did the boy's mother take to her grave? And what does the millionaire do when the truth finally comes out? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The first rays of sunlight crept over Chicago's skyline, painting the city in soft shades of pink and gold. Jaden stirred beneath his worn blanket, his small body curled tight against the morning chill. The rooftop of the abandoned hotel had been his home for the past 3 months, longer than any other spot he'd found since leaving his last foster home. He sat up slowly, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The concrete surface beneath him was hard and cold, but at least up here he felt safe. Nobody bothered looking for kids on rooftops. His gaze drifted to the shoebox beside his makeshift bed, containing everything he owned in the world. With gentle hands, Jaden lifted the lid and carefully removed the photograph wrapped in a faded washcloth. His mother's smile beamed back at him, frozen in time. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, just like his did when he laughed, which wasn't very often these days. He traced her face with his finger before rewrapping the photo with practiced care. "Morning, Mom," he whispered, tucking the precious package back into its cardboard home. The broken fire hose valve near the maintenance door had become part of his morning routine. Jaden pulled out his toothbrush, swiped from a downtown drugstore weeks ago, and held it under the steady drip of water. The valve had been leaking since he'd found this place, and he hoped it would keep dripping forever. Clean water wasn't always easy to find. As he brushed his teeth, Jaden watched the city wake up below. Cars started filling the streets, and early morning commuters hurried along the sidewalks with their coffee cups and phones. None of them ever looked up. None of them noticed the small boy watching from above. When his stomach growled, Jaden knew it was time to start his daily hunt for food. He stuffed his few belongings into his worn backpack and made his way down the fire escape, careful to avoid the rusty spots that might give way under even his slight weight. The morning air was crisp as Jaden moved through the alleyways he knew by heart. Behind the corner store, he found 2 intact bottles that would get him a few cents at the recycling center. In the dumpster behind the cafe, wrapped in paper napkins, half a sandwich sat untouched on top of coffee grounds and paper cups. "Better than yesterday," he mumbled to himself, carefully pulling the sandwich free. A soft meow caught his attention. The orange tabby cat that frequented this alley watched him with hopeful eyes. Jaden had seen it around for weeks now, its ribs showing through matted fur. Something in those hungry eyes reminded him of himself. "Here you go, buddy," Jaden said, tearing the sandwich in half. He placed one portion on a clean napkin and set it down for the cat. "We gotta stick together, right?" The cat crept forward, sniffing cautiously before taking small bites. Jaden ate his own half slowly, savoring each mouthful. As he finished, he heard the familiar sound of heavy boots on pavement. His heart jumped. Officer Martinez was making his morning rounds early today. Jaden quickly gathered his backpack, giving the cat a final glance before slipping behind a dumpster. The officer's footsteps grew closer and Jaden held his breath. "Anyone back here?" Officer Martinez called out, shining his flashlight down the alley. Jaden stayed perfectly still, pressing himself against the cold metal of the dumpster. He'd learned early on that some cops would try to help, sending him back into the system he'd fled. But he couldn't go back there, not after what happened in the last home. When the footsteps finally faded, Jaden let out a long breath. He peered around the corner to make sure the coast was clear before emerging from his hiding spot. That's when he noticed the townhouse across the street. It stood out among the older buildings, all gleaming windows and modern lines. A smart home, he'd heard someone call it once. Through the large front window, he could see screens mounted on the walls and little blinking lights from various gadgets. Movement caught his eye as a woman, probably in her 30s, wearing neat clothes and carrying a large purse, walked out to a car parked in the driveway. She must be the new nanny he'd seen arriving yesterday. She was struggling with several bags of groceries, making multiple trips between the store and the house. Jaden watched as she loaded the last bag into the car's trunk. She glanced at her watch and hurried back inside, leaving the front door slightly ajar in her haste. For a moment, Jaden imagined what it would be like to live in a house like that, warm and safe with full cupboards and soft beds. The day passed slowly as Jaden wandered his usual routes, collecting bottles and avoiding attention. As darkness fell, he made his way back to his rooftop sanctuary. The temperature was dropping, and he could see his breath in the air as he pulled his tarp over his blanket. From his perch, he had a clear view of the townhouse's upper floor. Light spilled from what looked like a nursery window, and he could see shadows moving inside. Maybe it was the nanny, putting a baby to bed. His mother used to do that for him, singing soft lullabies until he drifted off to sleep. Jaden's eyes grew heavy as he watched the gentle movement behind the window. He pulled his blanket tighter around his shoulders and curled into a ball to preserve warmth. The city lights twinkled around him like stars, and the distant sound of traffic created a familiar lullaby. As his eyes slowly closed, the last thing he saw was the warm glow from the nursery window across the street. Sleep came quickly, as it always did, bringing dreams of warmer days and his mother's smile. The midnight air hung still and heavy over Chicago's sleeping streets. Jaden shifted restlessly beneath his tarp, caught in the space between sleep and waking. Something pulled at his senses, dragging him from his dreams. A sharp, burning smell filled his nostrils. His eyes snapped open. This wasn't the usual city smell of exhaust and garbage. This was different, acrid, and dangerous. Jaden sat up quickly, his heart already beginning to race as survival instincts kicked in. The source wasn't hard to find. Across the street, wisps of gray smoke curled from the townhouse's upper window, the nursery he'd watched earlier. The smoke looked almost gentle in the moonlight, like ghostly fingers reaching into the night sky. Jaden blinked hard and rubbed his eyes. Sometimes his dreams felt so real that waking up was confusing. But the burning smell remained, and the smoke continued to drift upward, growing thicker by the second. "No, no, no," he whispered, scrambling to his feet. The nanny's car wasn't in the driveway anymore. Had she gone home for the night? Was anyone else inside? Without stopping to put on his shoes, Jaden ran to the fire escape. His bare feet clanged against the metal steps as he descended, moving faster than he ever had before. The rough metal bit into his palms, but he barely noticed. 3 stories down, he swung onto the ladder and let it slide to its full length, dropping the last few feet to the ground. The impact sent shocks through his legs, but Jaden was already running. The asphalt scraped his feet as he sprinted across the empty street. No sirens pierced the night. No flashing lights approached. Just the sound of his own rapid breathing and his heart pounding in his ears. He reached the front door and grabbed the handle, twisting it hard. Locked. Of course it was locked. Through the decorative glass panels, he could see the dim glow of security lights, but no movement inside. "Help!" he shouted, pounding on the door. His voice sounded small and hollow in the quiet street. "Is anyone in there? Fire! There's a fire!" Nothing. Jaden ran to the side of the house, looking up at the windows. They were all too high to reach, and the fancy smart home security system probably had them locked tight anyway. The smoke was getting thicker now. He could see it more clearly against the streetlights. His bare feet slipped on the dewy grass as he rounded the corner to the back of the house. There had to be a way in. There had to be something he could do. The thought of just watching, of doing nothing while someone might be trapped inside, made his chest tight with panic. That's when he saw it. A metal grate at ground level, partially hidden by ornamental bushes. A basement window. Jaden dropped to his knees, ignoring the rough concrete that scraped his skin. The grate wasn't completely secured. One corner had come loose from its mounting. With trembling fingers, Jaden pulled at the loose corner. The metal was cold and slightly rusty, but it moved. He worked it back and forth, feeling it give way little by little. Finally, with a grunt of effort, he managed to create an opening just big enough for his small frame. The window behind the grate was cracked open slightly, probably to ventilate the basement. Jaden said a quick thank you to whatever luck had given him this chance. He squeezed through the opening, careful not to catch his clothes on the rough edges of the grate. The basement was dark and cool, filled with the hum of machinery, probably the heating and cooling systems for the smart home. Jaden's eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness. He could make out shapes of storage boxes and what looked like exercise equipment. A sound from above made him freeze, a cough, weak but distinct, followed by another. Someone was definitely up there. Jaden moved carefully through the basement, feeling his way along the wall until he found the stairs. Each step creaked softly under his weight as he climbed, and the smell of smoke grew stronger. His throat began to burn and his eyes watered. At the top of the stairs, a door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, Jaden could see the dim glow of security lights in what looked like a kitchen. The smoke was thicker here, hanging in layers near the ceiling. Another cough echoed from somewhere above, followed by what might have been a whimper. Jaden's heart raced faster. Someone was up there, in trouble, maybe hurt. He pushed the basement door open wider and stepped into the kitchen. The house was eerily quiet except for the distant coughing and the soft whir of electronics. Emergency lights cast weird shadows on the walls, and thin tendrils of smoke drifted down the staircase like fog. Jaden moved toward the stairs, keeping low where the air was clearer. His bare feet made no sound on the polished wood floors. The coughing grew louder as he climbed, and now he could hear something else. A faint crackling sound that made his skin crawl. The smoke thickened with each step he took. Jaden pulled the collar of his t-shirt up over his nose, but it didn't help much. His eyes stung, and each breath burned in his chest. But the sound of coughing continued, pulling him upward into the growing danger. The smoke grew thicker as Jaden reached the second floor. His lungs burned with each shallow breath, and his eyes stung so badly he could barely keep them open. The security lights cast an eerie glow through the haze, making shadows dance on the walls like ghostly figures. A series of coughs led him to a closed door at the end of the hallway. This had to be the nursery he'd seen from his rooftop. Orange light flickered beneath the door. Fire was close. "Hello?" Jaden called out, his voice rough from the smoke. "Is anyone in there?" "Help!" A small voice answered between coughs. I can't get out." Jaden grabbed the doorknob and immediately jerked his hand back. It was hot. He pulled his sleeve over his palm and tried again, twisting hard. The door wouldn't budge. "Stand back from the door," he shouted. "I can't move," the voice called back, panic rising in its tone. "My chair is stuck." Chair? Jaden's heart skipped a beat. Through the smoke and fear clouding his mind, he remembered seeing the nanny earlier helping a little girl in a wheelchair. He threw his shoulder against the door. It shuddered but held firm. The smoke was getting thicker by the second, and he could feel heat building behind the walls. They didn't have much time. Jaden looked around frantically. The adjacent room was some kind of playroom, with expensive toys scattered across the floor. His gaze landed on a child-sized bed frame made of sturdy metal tubes. Without hesitation, he grabbed the frame and yanked it apart. The screws popped free with a screech of metal. Now he had what he needed, a long metal tube that could work as a lever. "Hold on," he called out. "I'm coming." Jaden wedged the metal tube under the door, right above where it met the floor. He pushed down with all his weight, muscles straining. The door creaked and lifted slightly. "Almost there," he grunted. With a final surge of effort, he forced the door up just enough that it cleared whatever was jamming it. The door swung open with a bang. Smoke billowed out, making Jaden stumble back and cough. When he could see again, his heart nearly stopped. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, sat strapped into a high-tech wheelchair. Her face was streaked with tears and her dark curls were damp with sweat. "I tried to move," she said between coughs, "but the controls won't work, and I'm stuck." Jaden rushed to her side. The wheelchair was unlike anything he'd seen before, all sleek curves and blinking lights. But now those lights were dim, and the chair's display screen showed only error messages. The safety harness holding her in place had multiple clips and buckles. "I'm Jaden," he said, working quickly to undo the straps. "What's your name?" "Ava," she whispered, coughing again. A loud crack from above made them both jump. The ceiling was starting to buckle. "Okay, Ava, Jaden said, trying to keep his voice calm even as his hands shook. "I'm going to get you out of here. Hold on tight to me." He slipped one arm under her legs and the other behind her back, lifting her carefully but quickly from the chair. She was small for her age, light in his arms. Ava wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face against his shoulder. The hallway was filling with smoke so thick it was like trying to see through fog. The heat was intense now, and somewhere nearby flames crackled hungrily. Another crack echoed through the house, this time followed by the sound of something heavy falling. Part of the ceiling collapsed behind them, blocking the way they'd come. Sparks and burning debris rained down, and the air grew even hotter. Jaden's mind raced. They couldn't go back the way he'd come up. That path was gone now. The front stairs were their only chance, but they were at the other end of the long hallway. He looked down at the metal tube still in his hand, then at Ava. An idea formed. "Hold on really tight," he told her. "Don't let go, no matter what." Jaden dropped the metal tube onto the floor and stepped onto it like a skateboard, keeping Ava secured against his chest. The smooth hardwood floors would work in their favor, if they could just move fast enough. He pushed off with one foot and they began to roll forward. The tube wasn't perfect, but it worked better than trying to run while carrying Ava. They picked up speed as the floor sloped slightly toward the stairs. Behind them, more of the ceiling gave way. The crash sent a wave of hot air rushing past them, pushing them faster. Flames licked along the walls, racing them to the staircase. Jaden could barely see through the smoke now. His lungs felt like they were on fire, and his eyes streamed tears. But he could make out the top of the stairs just ahead. They were almost there. A tremendous crack split the air above them. Jaden looked up to see a massive beam beginning to fall. There was no time to think, no time to plan. Pure instinct took over. He hugged Ava tighter and threw himself forward, twisting in the air so that his body would take the impact instead of hers. For a moment, they were airborne, floating through the smoke-filled air as the beam crashed down behind them. The stone steps rushed up to meet them. Jaden's world exploded in pain, and then everything went black. Flashing lights pierced the darkness as two ambulances screeched to a halt in front of the smoldering townhouse. Neighbors in robes and pajamas gathered on the sidewalk, their faces illuminated by the dying flames. A woman in curlers pointed frantically at the two motionless figures on the front steps. "They're just children," she cried out. "I saw the smoke and called right away, but that boy, he went in there on purpose. He saved her." Paramedics rushed forward with stretchers and medical equipment. The first team reached Ava, carefully checking her vital signs before lifting her small body onto a backboard. The second team approached Jaden, who lay crumpled on his side, one arm still protectively curved as if holding Ava. As they rolled him onto his back, Jaden's eyes fluttered open. Everything was a blur of movement and noise. Sharp pain shot through his body, making him wince. Through the haze, he caught glimpses of uniformed figures moving around him, their voices urgent but distant. Male, approximately 10 years old, multiple contusions, possible smoke inhalation. They lifted him onto something soft yet firm. A neck brace was fastened around his throat, and an oxygen mask covered his face. The clean air felt amazing in his burning lungs. Jaden turned his head slightly, fighting against the brace. Through the crowd of emergency workers, he saw Ava on another stretcher. Her face was smudged with soot, but her chest rose and fell steadily beneath the oxygen mask. She was alive. Relief washed over him just before darkness claimed him again. The emergency room buzzed with activity as doctors worked to stabilize both children. Ava was taken to the pediatric intensive care unit, where specialists familiar with her condition monitored her carefully. Her wheelchair-bound status made them extra cautious about potential complications. Jaden, however, was moved to a separate wing once his immediate injuries were treated. With no ID and no guardian to claim him, hospital security took charge of his case. They placed him in a monitored room, part recovery space, part holding cell, with a guard posted outside. Hours passed. Jaden lay on the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. His body ached, but the pain medication they'd given him made everything feel distant and fuzzy. The guard checked on him periodically through the small window in the door, but no one came in to talk to him. At 3 a.m, Marcus Wynn's private jet touched down at O'Hare International Airport. He'd been in San Francisco for a tech conference when the call came through about the fire. Now, as his driver sped toward the hospital, Marcus watched security footage from his home system on his tablet. The video quality was poor due to the smoke, but it clearly showed a boy entering through the basement. Marcus's jaw clenched. Then came footage from the nursery camera. The same boy appearing in the doorway, approaching Ava's wheelchair. The feed cut out after that, lost to the fire. "Pull up any other angles," Marcus ordered his security chief over the phone. "I want to know exactly how he got in and what he was doing before the fire started." More footage appeared on his screen. The boy had been watching the house earlier that day when the nanny was loading groceries. Marcus's hands balled into fists. In his mind, the story wrote itself. A homeless kid cases the house, waits for an opportunity, starts a fire as a distraction. The car pulled up to the hospital entrance. Marcus strode through the automatic doors, flanked by 2 private security officers. The hospital administrator was already waiting for him. "Mr. Wynn, your daughter is stable. She's sleeping now, but the doctors say there's no serious damage. Just some mild smoke inhalation." "And the boy?" Marcus's voice was cold. "In a secure room on the 3rd floor. He has some bruising and a mild concussion, but nothing life-threatening. The police are waiting for your statement before proceeding." "I want him charged," Marcus said firmly. "Breaking and entering, endangerment of a minor. Whatever charges will stick. That boy was watching my house, planning this." The administrator nodded and led them to the elevator. Minutes later, they stood outside Jaden's room. Through the window, Marcus saw a small, thin boy with dark circles under his eyes. His clothes were burned and dirty. He looked nothing like the calculating criminal Marcus had imagined. 2 police officers entered the room first, followed by Marcus and his security team. Jaden sat up slowly, wincing at the movement. His eyes darted between the faces but settled on Marcus. Something in the man's expression told him this was Ava's father. "We're charging you with criminal trespassing and reckless endangerment," one officer stated, pulling out a notepad. "Do you understand these charges?" Jaden said nothing. His hand slipped into his pocket, fingers brushing against the charred edge of his mother's photograph, the only thing he had left of her. The edges were burned now, just like everything else in his life. "Did you start the fire?" Marcus demanded, stepping forward. "Were you trying to rob us? Answer me." Still, Jaden remained silent. What could he say? That he'd been living on a rooftop, watching their family from afar? That he'd seen the smoke and acted without thinking? They'd never believe him anyway. The police officer sighed and made a note in his pad. "Given his age, he'll be remanded to juvenile detention pending a hearing. Unless you'd prefer to press additional charges?" "No," Marcus said, his voice tight with anger and confusion. "Just get him out of here." The officers moved forward with handcuffs, but Marcus's security team stepped in. "We'll handle the transfer," one of them said, showing credentials that made the officers step back. As they led Jaden from the room, his fingers closed tightly around the burned photograph in his pocket. He thought of his mother, of what she would say about tonight. He'd saved someone, just like she always taught him to help others. But now, like every other time in his life, no one would believe in him. The door closed behind them with a heavy click, leaving Marcus alone in the room, staring at the empty bed where the mysterious boy had lain. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the silence in Ava's hospital room. Marcus sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his suit jacket draped over the back, his tie loosened. The first rays of morning sun crept through the window blinds, casting thin stripes of light across the sterile floor. Ava looked so small in the hospital bed, her delicate frame dwarfed by white sheets and medical equipment. Her right hand was wrapped in clean bandages where she'd burned it trying to escape. Dark smudges still marked her face despite the nurse's careful cleaning. A clear oxygen mask covered her nose and mouth, helping her breathe while her smoke-damaged lungs recovered. Marcus reached out and touched her unbandaged hand, careful not to disturb the pulse monitor clipped to her finger. Her skin felt warm, too warm. The doctors said she was running a slight fever, a common response to smoke inhalation, but assured him it wasn't dangerous. "Your oxygen levels are improving," Dr. Chen had told him an hour ago during morning rounds. The smoke exposure was significant, But children are remarkably resilient. With rest and continued oxygen therapy, she should make a full recovery. Marcus nodded mechanically at the time, but now the words, "smoke exposure was significant," kept echoing in his mind. His daughter could have died. The thought made his stomach clench. He'd left her in what he thought was the safest place possible, their own home with every security measure money could buy. And yet somehow... He pulled out his tablet, fingers moving automatically to the security app. The footage from last night played again, the boy slipping through the basement grate, moving through the house, appearing in Ava's doorway. Marcus's jaw tightened. The timestamps showed the boy entering just minutes before the smoke became visible. "What were you really doing there?" he muttered, rewinding the footage again. No signs of the boy starting the fire, no evidence of him taking anything, just quick, purposeful movement toward Ava's room, as if he somehow knew exactly where to go. Marcus frowned and scrolled backward before the fire started. He needed to see what happened earlier, what he might have missed. The footage showed Ava's room, peaceful and quiet. She was alone in her bed, the night light casting a soft glow. Wait. Marcus sat up straighter, his tired eyes suddenly alert. Ava was alone. But that wasn't right. She hadn't been alone when he left for his flight. He distinctly remembered arranging for overnight care because his regular nanny was sick. He checked the timestamp and scrolled back further. There, movement in the room. Someone was with Ava, adjusting her blankets, checking her wheelchair. The figure moved in and out of frame, their face never quite visible in the dim light. Marcus's fingers flew across the screen, pulling up different camera angles. The kitchen view showed someone moving around earlier in the evening. The front entrance camera caught them arriving, but the porch light created too much glare for a clear image. He switched back to Ava's room feed. The mystery caregiver moved around the space with familiar ease, knowing exactly where everything was kept. They seemed to know all the daily routines, just like someone who'd worked there before. A small sound drew his attention back to the bed. Ava stirred slightly, her forehead creasing. The oxygen mask fogged with her breathing as her lips moved, forming words. Marcus leaned closer, straining to hear. Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from the smoke. "Miss Carol..." The tablet nearly slipped from Marcus's hands. Carol Taylor. The nanny he'd fired 3 weeks ago for inappropriate behavior, showing up uninvited, asking personal questions about his life, leaving gifts he hadn't requested. She'd become increasingly unstable, claiming they had a special connection he was ignoring. "No," he whispered. "It couldn't be." But even as denial formed on his lips, pieces started falling into place. Carol knew all the security codes. She knew Ava's routines, the layout of the house, which cameras had blind spots. She would have known exactly how to get in, how to move around undetected. And she had reason to be angry. Marcus looked down at his sleeping daughter, then back at the tablet in his hands. The certainty he'd felt about the boy's guilt began to crack, splitting open like ice in spring thaw. He'd been so quick to assume, so ready to blame the obvious suspect, the homeless kid who'd been watching his house. But what if he'd been watching for a different reason? What if he'd seen something Marcus hadn't? Ava stirred again, her bandaged hand twitching on the blanket. Marcus took it gently, careful not to disturb the wrappings. His daughter had nearly died, not because of a desperate boy seeking shelter or valuables, but because he'd failed to see the real threat hiding in plain sight. "Miss Carroll," Ava mumbled again, her voice tinged with fear even in sleep. "Fire." Marcus's free hand tightened around the tablet until his knuckles turned white. The first rays of morning sun grew stronger, filling the room with light that suddenly felt harsh and revealing. In its glare, his assumptions about the boy looked as fragile as ash, crumbling away to reveal a much darker truth beneath. The hospital security room felt smaller with each passing hour. Jaden sat on a hard plastic chair, his feet barely touching the floor. The room smelled of disinfectant and coffee from the guard stationed by the door. His throat felt dry, but he kept his eyes fixed on the linoleum floor, counting the black specks in the white tiles. A gentle knock broke the silence. A nurse with kind eyes and graying hair stepped in, holding a paper cup of water. "Here you go, sweetheart," she said, extending the cup toward him. "You must be thirsty." Jaden didn't move. The guard shifted in his chair, the metal legs scraping against the floor. "Come on, kid," the guard said. "At least drink something." Jaden's eyes flickered to the evidence bag on the counter across the room. Inside was the charred edge of his mother's photograph, rescued from his pocket before they'd taken his smoke-damaged clothes. The corner of her smile was still visible through the clear plastic. The nurse followed his gaze. "Would you like your photo back?" she asked softly. Jaden's fingers twitched in his lap, but he remained silent. The nurse set the water cup on a small table within his reach and left, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. In another part of the hospital, Marcus paced the length of his daughter's room, phone pressed to his ear. "I want everything you can find on Carol Taylor," he said to his head of security. "Where she lives, where she goes, who she talks to. She had access to our house codes. Check the logs for any unauthorized entries in the past month." He paused by Ava's bed, watching her chest rise and fall with each breath. The oxygen mask fogged rhythmically. "And John?" Marcus lowered his voice. "This is priority one. If she's involved in this..." He let the sentence hang unfinished. "Understood, sir," John replied. "I'll have a team on it immediately." Marcus ended the call and sank into the chair beside Ava's bed. The weight of his earlier accusations pressed heavily on his shoulders. Down in the security room, a new visitor arrived. Ms. Ramirez wore practical shoes and carried a worn leather bag. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her ID badge identified her as a hospital social worker. "Good morning," she said, pulling up a chair across from Jaden. "I'm Ms. Ramirez. Would you mind if we talked for a bit?" Jaden's expression remained neutral, but his eyes tracked her movements as she settled into the chair. "I brought some breakfast," she continued, pulling out a paper bag. "Nothing fancy, just a breakfast sandwich and some orange juice. Hospital food isn't the best, but it's better than nothing." She placed the items on the table next to the untouched water cup. The guard started to say something, but Ms. Ramirez held up a hand. "It's okay," she said. "I cleared it with security." She turned back to Jaden. "You know, young man, you've had quite a night. I can't imagine how tired you must be." Jaden's shoulders relaxed slightly at being called young man instead of kid. Ms. Ramirez noticed but didn't comment. "I understand there's something important to you in that evidence bag," she said, glancing at the counter. "Would you like me to get it for you?" For the first time since she entered, Jaden's eyes met hers directly. She stood slowly and retrieved the bag, handling it with obvious care. Instead of opening it immediately, she placed it gently in his hands. Jaden's fingers curled around the plastic, holding it close to his chest. His eyes grew damp, but no tears fell. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming message. The security logs had been analyzed. Carol's old entry code had been used at the back door shortly before the fire started. His stomach twisted as he opened a second message. The fire marshal's preliminary report. The fire had originated in the nursery drapes. Traces of accelerant were found at the point of origin. This was no accident. Marcus looked at his sleeping daughter, then out the window toward the security room where they held Jaden. The boy had entered through the basement, not the back door. He'd gone straight to Ava, not stopped to set fires. Every assumption Marcus had made was crumbling, replaced by a horrible certainty about who was really responsible. But he said nothing. Not yet. Not until he was absolutely sure. The weight of his mistake pressed down on him like a physical thing, but he kept his silence. In the security room below, Jaden sat quietly holding his mother's photo, while somewhere in the city, Carol's trail grew colder with each passing minute. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the hospital floors. In different rooms, 3 people sat alone with their thoughts: a boy clutching a burned photograph, a father wrestling with guilt, and a social worker watching quietly, waiting for trust to build one small moment at a time. Morning sunlight filtered through the hospital room's blinds, casting thin stripes across Ava's bed. Her eyes fluttered open, clearer now than they'd been since the fire. The oxygen mask had been replaced with a smaller nasal cannula, and some color had returned to her cheeks. "Daddy?" Her voice was raspy but stronger. Marcus, who had dozed off in the chair beside her, jerked awake. "I'm here, sweetheart." He leaned forward, taking her small hand in his. "How are you feeling?" "My throat hurts," she said, reaching for the water cup on her bedside table. Marcus helped her take a few careful sips through the straw. "The doctors say you'll feel better soon," he assured her, smoothing back her dark curls. Do you remember what happened?" Ava's face scrunched up in concentration. "There was smoke," she said slowly, and ... Her eyes widened suddenly. "Miss Carroll was there." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Miss Carroll? Are you sure?" Ava nodded, gripping her father's hand tighter. "She came to visit, but she was angry." Her voice trembled slightly. "She lit the curtains with her lighter. I saw her do it." Marcus's throat went dry. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "She said..." Ava paused, struggling to remember the exact words. "She said you'd pay for firing her. That's what she said before she made the fire." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I was scared, Daddy. I couldn't move my chair." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He pulled Ava into a gentle hug, careful of her IV lines, his mind racing with the implications of what she'd just revealed. "You're safe now," he whispered, but his voice shook slightly. "I promise you're safe." After making sure Ava was comfortable and had a nurse nearby, Marcus stepped into the hallway. His hands trembled as he called his head of security. "John, I need you to pull every file we have on Carroll. And..." He hesitated, a long-buried memory stirring. "And I need Denise Taylor's personnel file too, from 15 years ago." Back in his temporary office in the hospital's executive wing, Marcus spread the files across his desk. Carroll's employment record was typical enough: good references, clean background check. Nothing that would have flagged her as dangerous. But there had been signs looking back. The way she'd grown increasingly possessive of Ava. The lingering looks she'd given Marcus himself. The small boundary violations that had led to her termination. He pushed Carroll's file aside and opened the older one. Denise Taylor. The name brought a flood of memories he'd tried to forget. She'd been one of his first hires when his company was just a startup, working late nights coding alongside him. Brilliant but quiet, keeping to herself mostly. Until that night. Marcus had been walking to his car after a late meeting with investors. 3 men had cornered him in the parking garage. But Denise had been there, leaving work late as usual. She'd fought them off with surprising skill, saving his life and quite possibly his company's future. After that, he'd made sure she was taken care of. Better pay, flexible hours when she needed them, health insurance that covered her young son's medical needs. She'd been grateful but never asked for more. Then one day, she simply didn't come to work. No notice, no forwarding address. He'd tried to find her, worried at first, but eventually life and business had moved on. Now, 15 years later, Marcus stared at her personnel file. The usual documents were there: resume, tax forms, performance reviews. But paper-clipped to the back was something that made his heart stop. An old employee ID badge showing Denise's face, serious but kind. And next to it, a small photograph that had been attached to her insurance paperwork. It was a baby photo labeled simply Dependent Jaden Taylor, age 6 months. Marcus's hand shook as he pulled up the security footage from the fire on his laptop. The boy who had carried Ava to safety. Thin, determined, with the same quiet intensity in his eyes. He looked back at the baby photo, then at the security image again. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same curve of the jaw, the same set of the eyes. The boy who had saved his daughter was Denise Taylor's son. Marcus sat back heavily in his chair, the weight of understanding crushing down on him. Somewhere in this same hospital, a security guard was watching over a boy who had risked his life to save Ava. A boy whose mother had once saved Marcus himself. A boy he had accused of setting the very fire he'd braved to rescue his daughter. The files blurred before him as tears filled his eyes. He had been so wrong about so much. And now, finally, he knew exactly what he needed to do. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor cast harsh shadows as Ms. Ramirez walked beside Jaden. Her gentle hand rested on his shoulder, steadying him as they made their way toward the exit. 2 police officers followed at a distance, standard protocol for a minor being transferred to protective custody. Jaden's shoelaces were still missing, taken as a precaution when he'd first been detained. His feet shuffled quietly in the loose shoes, each step heavy with exhaustion. The photo of his mother, now sealed in a clear evidence bag, was clutched tightly against his chest. "It's just for tonight," Ms. Ramirez said softly, trying to catch his eye. "The group home has clean beds, hot showers, and good people." She squeezed his shoulder gently. "I'll be there first thing in the morning to help sort everything out." Jaden nodded but remained silent. His eyes were fixed on the floor, counting the tiles as they passed. 1, 2, 3. Anything to keep his mind off what was happening. Marcus stood at the nurse's station signing release papers. His suit was wrinkled from spending the night at the hospital, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He glanced up as Jaden and Ms. Ramirez approached the exit, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Wynn," Ms. Ramirez stopped, her voice firm but pleading. "Now that we know what really happened, now that the charges are dropped, surely there's a better solution than sending him to a shelter?" Marcus's pen hesitated over the papers. "The system has protocols, Ms. Ramirez. Without a legal guardian—" "He saved your daughter's life," she interrupted, her professional composure cracking slightly. "He needs stability, not another institution." Before Marcus could respond, a small voice rang out from down the hall. "Daddy, wait!" They all turned to see Ava in her wheelchair pressed against the glass window of her room. A nurse stood behind her, looking apologetic for letting her get up. "He's my fire angel," Ava called out, her hands pressed against the glass. "Don't let him go." Jaden lifted his head for the first time, meeting Ava's eyes through the window. Something passed between them, a connection forged in smoke and fear and trust. For a moment, Marcus seemed to waver, his hand reaching slightly toward Jaden. But the moment passed. He turned away, his shoulders tight with tension. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "The paperwork is already processed." Ms. Ramirez shook her head in disappointment but guided Jaden toward the exit. As they stepped through the automatic doors, Jaden looked back one last time. Through the glass, he could still see Ava watching him, her small face pressed against the window. The drive to the group home was silent. Streetlights flashed across Jaden's face as he stared out the window, still holding the photo close. Ms. Ramirez kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, her heart heavy with the weight of another child being shuffled through the system. The transitional home was a converted Victorian house, its paint peeling but its windows warm with light. Ms. Ramirez led Jaden inside, where a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Chen showed them to a small room with 4 beds. Only one was empty. "Bathroom's down the hall," Mrs. Chen said kindly. "There's clean towels in the cabinet, and I can find you some pajamas." Jaden sat on the edge of the cot, running his hand over the thin blanket. It wasn't the rooftop. No stars above him, no city sounds below. But at least it was a real bed. Ms. Ramirez knelt in front of him, making sure she had his attention. "Listen to me, Jaden. You're not alone, okay?" She waited until he met her eyes. "I mean it. I'll be back tomorrow morning, first thing." Jaden nodded, his fingers tracing the edges of the photo bag. Ms. Ramirez stood reluctantly, knowing she had to leave, but hating every step toward the door. "Try to get some sleep," she said softly. "Tomorrow's a new day." After she left, Jaden lay back on the cot, holding the photo above him. Through the clear plastic, his mother's smile seemed to shimmer in the dim light. He pressed it close to his chest and closed his eyes, trying to remember the feeling of her arms around him. Across town, in the quiet of Ava's hospital room, Marcus stood at the window. The city lights sparkled below, but his mind was elsewhere. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he pressed the speed dial. "John," he said when his head of security answered, "I need you to do something. Get me everything we have on Denise Taylor." He paused, his throat tight. and find out what happened to her. The city hummed outside, indifferent to the lives being changed within its walls. In the group home, Jaden curled around his mother's photo, dreaming of rooftops and stars. In the hospital, Ava slept peacefully, her own guardian angel watching over her from a distance. And somewhere between them all, the truth about Denise Taylor waited to be uncovered. Marcus sat in his home office, surrounded by the soft glow of his desk lamp. The house felt eerily quiet without Ava's cheerful voice echoing through the halls. She was sleeping upstairs in her hospital bed, nurses checking on her every hour. The fire had left its mark, not just on the walls, but on their lives. He pulled open the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, where he kept the oldest records. His fingers brushed past folders until he found what he was looking for. Employee records, 2013. The paper was slightly yellowed, the edges worn. Inside, organized with careful precision, were the remnants of lives that had touched his company and his own. Marcus spread the documents across his mahogany desk. Employment applications, performance reviews, correspondence, fragments of a past he'd almost forgotten. And there, in a thin manila folder marked Taylor D. Swing was the letter that had haunted him for years without him even knowing it. The resignation letter was handwritten on simple lined paper, the blue ink slightly faded. Denise's handwriting was neat but hurried, as if she'd written it in haste. "Dear Mr. Wynn, I have to leave for my son's safety. I can't risk him getting hurt because of me. Thank you for everything. Denise Taylor." Marcus ran his fingers over the words, remembering the day he'd found it on his desk. He'd been confused, concerned, but busy with a major acquisition. He'd meant to follow up, to check on her. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually, Denise Taylor became just another name in a file. He picked up his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found Patricia Morton, HR, retired. It was late, but he knew she'd answer. She always did. "Marcus?" Patricia's voice was alert despite the hour. "Is everything all right? I saw the news about the fire." "Pat, I need your help," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Do you remember Denise Taylor?" There was a pause. "The programmer? The one who helped you that night outside the office?" Another pause. "The one who disappeared?" "Yes." Marcus shuffled through more papers. "I need to know what happened to her after she left. Can you still access the old records?" "Give me a minute." He could hear keyboard clicks in the background. "I'm logging into the archive system now." Marcus waited, staring at an old staff photo. Denise stood at the edge of the group, her smile slight but genuine. She'd been brilliant but quiet, always working late, always putting in extra hours. He remembered now. She'd often mentioned her son, how she was saving for his education. "Okay, I'm in," Patricia said. "What exactly are we looking for?" "Everything. Addresses, employment history, medical records, anything public." Marcus pulled up his own laptop. "I'll search from my end, too." Together, they began piecing together Denise's life after she left the company. The picture that emerged was devastating in its clarity. "She moved 4 times in the first year," Patricia reported, her voice growing somber. "All short-term rentals in different parts of the city." Marcus found hospital records under a state assistance program. Multiple ER visits in 2015. Then, oh God, he stopped, his throat tightening. "What is it?" "Cancer diagnosis, ovarian stage 4. Marcus could barely get the words out. "She was admitted to St. Mary's Hospice in 2018. Patricia's typing grew more intense. "I found the social services records. There's a foster placement order for her son, Jaden Taylor. He was 5 when she died." Marcus sat back in his chair, the weight of revelation crushing him. "No next of kin listed?" "None." Patricia's voice was gentle. "Marcus, there's something else. The dates. The cancer diagnosis came just months after she left the company. She must have known when she resigned, The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. Denise hadn't just disappeared. She'd been protecting her son, trying to keep him from watching her die. She'd given up her job, her security, everything to shield him from what was coming. Marcus opened the final document, Denise's death certificate. 5 years ago, in a hospice room probably not far from where he'd been sitting in board meetings, the woman who had saved his life had died alone. He remembered that night clearly now, walking to his car late, distracted by a phone call. The mugger had appeared from nowhere, knife glinting. But Denise had been there, leaving work even later than him. She'd thrown her bag, shouted for help, created enough confusion for them both to run. She'd saved his life that night. And now, a decade later, her son, the boy she'd tried so desperately to protect, had carried Marcus's daughter from a burning building. Marcus closed his laptop slowly, the screen's light fading to darkness. The office felt smaller somehow, the shadows deeper. Somewhere in the city, Jaden Taylor was sleeping in a group home, probably clutching that burned photo Marcus had seen him holding, the last piece of his mother he had left. "Pat," Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." "What are you going to do?" she asked softly. Marcus looked at Denise's resignation letter again, understanding now what he hadn't seen then. The desperation behind those few simple lines, the sacrifice of a mother trying to protect her child. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't fail her again." He sat in the silence of his office, surrounded by the paper trails of lives connected by time and chance and sacrifice. Outside his window, the city lights twinkled like stars, the same stars that had watched over a boy on a rooftop, waiting for his moment to become someone's hero. The woman who had saved his life, twice he realized now by raising a son brave enough to run into fire, had died without him even knowing. And that son, carrying his mother's courage in his heart, had just saved Marcus's whole world. The morning light filtered through barred windows, casting long shadows across the crowded shelter dormitory. Jaden's eyes fluttered open to chaos, the kind that came with too many lost souls packed into too little space. Around him, kids argued over bathroom time while a tired-looking staff member's voice cut through the noise. "Everyone up! Breakfast in 15 minutes, no exceptions." Jaden curled tighter on his narrow cot, one hand pressed against his jacket pocket where his mother's photo lay safely hidden. The smell of institutional disinfectant mixed with the musty odor of unwashed bodies reminded him of his brief stint in foster care, before he'd chosen the freedom of the streets over the prison of other people's homes. 2 boys shoved past his bed fighting over a worn baseball cap. Jaden didn't flinch, didn't look up. He'd learned long ago that eye contact was an invitation for trouble. Instead, he focused on making himself smaller, less noticeable, a skill that had kept him safe on the streets for the past year. "Good morning, Jaden." Ms. Ramirez's voice was warm, cutting through the morning chaos like a beam of sunlight. She stood at the foot of his cot, holding a paper bag and what looked like fresh clothes. "I brought you some breakfast," she said, setting the bag down beside him. "And clean clothes. There's a shower room down the hall if you'd like to freshen up." Jaden's eyes darted to the bag, then back to his hands. His stomach growled, betraying his hunger, but he didn't move. Ms. Ramirez sat on the edge of the cot, careful to leave plenty of space between them. "You know, sometimes talking can help. Even just a little bit." She pulled out a breakfast sandwich wrapped in foil. "Maybe we could start with something small? Like, what was your mom's favorite food?" Jaden's fingers tightened around the photo in his pocket. The question caught him off guard, not because it was intrusive, but because it was so normal. Most adults asked about where he'd been sleeping, if he'd been stealing, why he ran away. Nobody ever asked about his mom's favorite food. "Pancakes," he whispered, so quietly Ms. Ramirez had to lean in to hear. "With blueberries. She used to make them on Sundays." Ms. Ramirez smiled but didn't push. She simply unwrapped the sandwich and placed it closer to him. "That sounds lovely. My mom made pancakes too, but she always burned them." A ghost of a smile flickered across Jaden's face. Mom burned them sometimes too, but she'd hum while she cooked. Even when they were burning, she'd just keep humming. She hummed? Ms. Ramirez's voice was gentle, encouraging. Jaden nodded, finally reaching for the sandwich. She said humming helps when you're scared, because you can't hum and be scared at the same time. He took a small bite, chewing slowly. I try to do it too sometimes when things get bad. Did you hum the other night during the fire? Jaden shook his head. No time, just had to get her out. He paused, his voice dropping even lower. The little girl, is she okay? She's doing well, Ms. Ramirez assured him. Thanks to you. Jaden picked at the edge of his sandwich, his shoulders hunched. After Mom died, I lived with my aunt for a while. She was nice at first, but then she lost her job and... He trailed off, but Ms. Ramirez could fill in the blanks. She started drinking? Jaden nodded. She'd forget to buy food. Sometimes she'd forget I was there at all. Sometimes she'd remember and get mad about it. He wrapped the remaining half of his sandwich carefully in its foil. I left after she threw Mom's picture at the wall. I couldn't let her break it. How long ago was that? A year, maybe? Jaden shrugged. The streets were better. At least there nobody pretended to want me. His voice cracked slightly. I never belonged anywhere. Not really. Ms. Ramirez fought the urge to hug him, knowing it would only make him retreat further. Instead, she placed the clean clothes beside him. Why don't you get cleaned up? I'll make sure your bed and things are safe while you're gone. Jaden hesitated, then carefully extracted the photo from his pocket. After a long moment, he handed it to Ms. Ramirez. The trust in that simple gesture made her heart ache. I'll guard it with my life, she promised. An hour later, Ms. Ramirez sat in her small office, facing Marcus Wynn across her cluttered desk. She'd just finished relaying her conversation with Jaden, watching as Marcus's composed facade cracked with each detail. He's been alone all this time, Marcus said, his voice rough. Living on rooftops while He trailed off, running a hand over his face. The kid's not just brave, Ms. Ramirez said quietly. He's built like steel, but he's crumbling inside. Every day he spends in the system is another day he learns to trust less, hope less. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing the small office. She could see him wrestling with something, guilt, responsibility, maybe both. Finally, he turned to face her. I want to see him, he said. His voice was firm but carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. But don't tell him who I am. Not yet. Ms. Ramirez studied him carefully. Are you sure? He's been through enough games with adults. It's not a game, Marcus insisted. I need to see him, really see him. Not as Denise's son or Ava's savior, just him. He sank back into the chair. I owe him that much at least. The shelter's common room buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Kids playing cards, watching TV, or just trying to find a quiet corner to escape. Marcus Wynn stood in the doorway, feeling distinctly out of place in his plain navy jacket and jeans. No designer labels, no security detail, just a man trying to blend in. Ms. Ramirez guided him through the maze of worn furniture and scattered toys. Remember, she whispered, he spooks easily, like a wild animal that's been hurt too many times. Marcus nodded, his eyes already scanning the room. He found Jaden instantly, a small figure hunched in the far corner, perched on a window seat with his knees pulled tight to his chest. The boy's dark eyes tracked their movement across the room, wary and watchful. Morning, everyone, Ms. Ramirez called out to the staff. This is Mr. Marcus. He's one of our sponsors checking in on the program today. The staff barely looked up, used to visitors coming and going. But Jaden's gaze sharpened, studying Marcus with the kind of attention that came from years of sizing up potential threats. Marcus approached slowly, remembering how his daughter's rescue ponies responded better to gentle movements. He stopped a few feet from Jaden's corner, giving the boy plenty of space. Mind if I sit? He asked, gesturing to the other end of the window seat. Jaden shrugged, a barely perceptible movement of one shoulder. His eyes never left Marcus's face. Marcus settled onto the worn cushion, careful to maintain the distance between them. The silence stretched, broken only by the muffled sounds of cartoons from the TV across the room. Through the window behind them, weak morning sunlight cast long shadows across the floor. "I heard about what you did," Marcus said finally, keeping his voice low and steady. "At the fire." Jaden's shoulders tensed, but he didn't move away. His fingers curled tighter around something in his pocket, probably the photo Ms. Ramirez had mentioned. "I'd like to hear about it," Marcus continued, "if you're willing to tell me." For a long moment, Jaden just stared at him. Then, so quietly, Marcus had to lean in slightly to hear. He spoke. "Why?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Not accusatory, just genuinely puzzled, as if he couldn't understand why anyone would care about his story. "Because what you did was extraordinary," Marcus answered honestly. "And I'd like to understand." Jaden's eyes dropped to his hands, now clasped tightly in his lap. "It wasn't extraordinary," he mumbled. "Anyone would have done it." "No," Marcus said gently. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have called 911 and waited. You went in." Jaden was quiet for so long, Marcus thought he wouldn't respond. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he began to speak. "I smelled the smoke first from where I was sleeping. I thought I was dreaming, but then I saw it coming from the window." His words came slowly, carefully chosen. "I tried the front door. It was locked. All the windows were too high, but there was this basement grate." He described finding his way through the smoke-filled house, following the sound of coughing. Marcus's hands clenched into fists as Jaden recounted breaking apart the bed frame to force open the jammed door. "She was just sitting there, in this fancy wheelchair, crying." Jaden's voice caught slightly. "She looked so scared. Like she didn't deserve to be left alone like that." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had to resist the urge to tell Jaden right then who he was, who Ava was, how sorry he was for doubting him. "The smoke was getting really thick," Jaden continued. "I couldn't see much, but I got her loose and picked her up, chair and all. It was heavy, but..." He shrugged again. "Had to get her out." "Weren't you scared?" Marcus asked, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite hide. Jaden looked up then, meeting Marcus's eyes directly for the first time. Being scared doesn't matter when someone needs help. The simple wisdom in those words, so much like something Denise would have said, made Marcus's chest ache. He opened his mouth to tell Jaden everything, but the words stuck in his throat. This wasn't the right time, not when the boy was just starting to trust enough to talk. Instead, he stood slowly, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Thank you for telling me, and for what you did." Jaden just nodded, already withdrawing back into himself, his gaze returning to the window. Marcus walked away on unsteady legs, Ms. Ramirez falling into step beside him as they headed for the exit. Neither spoke until they reached the parking lot, where Marcus had to lean against his car for support. "That boy is hers," he said hoarsely. "He is Denise's, you can feel it in the way he thinks." The morning sun filtered through the shelter's dusty windows as Jaden sat in the cramped office, perched on the edge of a worn chair. Ms. Ramirez settled into the seat next to him, her familiar presence helping to ease the tension in his shoulders. "I know you don't like surprises," she began, her voice gentle but direct, the way she always spoke to him. "So, I'm going to be completely honest with you about what's happening." Jaden's fingers instinctively found the photo in his pocket, tracing its worn edges through the fabric. He'd learned long ago that when adults started conversations this way, it usually meant change was coming, and change rarely worked in his favor. "A private sponsor has offered you a place to stay," Ms. Ramirez continued. "It's a guest house, separate from the main property, clean, safe, no strings attached." Jaden's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean, no strings?" "It means exactly that. No pressure to be adopted, no expectations. Just a quiet place where you can rest and think about what you want next." She leaned forward slightly, making sure to catch his eye. And I'll be there with you as your temporary guardian. That's non-negotiable, I made sure of it. Something in Jaden's chest loosened slightly at those words. Ms. Ramirez had never lied to him, never tried to sugarcoat things. If she said she'd be there, she meant it. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "As long as you need. The sponsor understands that trust takes time." She smiled softly. "And honestly, I think you could use a break from shelter life." Jaden glanced around the cramped office, thinking about the constant noise in the common room, the way he had to watch his belongings every second, the endless stream of well-meaning but invasive questions from staff and social workers. His shoulders slumped slightly. "Okay," he said finally, "I'll try it." Ms. Ramirez's smile widened. "That's all anyone's asking for. Want to go pack your things?" Jaden almost laughed. His things consisted of 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, and his mother's photo. It took less than 5 minutes to gather everything into a small backpack the shelter had given him. They drove in comfortable silence, Ms. Ramirez humming softly to the radio, while Jaden watched the city scroll past his window. The neighborhoods grew progressively nicer, the buildings more polished, until suddenly his heart skipped a beat. He recognized this street. His whole body tensed as they turned onto the block where he'd seen the fire, where he'd carried that little girl out. The townhouse was still there, though scaffolding covered part of the damaged upper floor. Construction workers moved around the site, carrying materials and calling out to each other. Ms. Ramirez must have noticed his reaction because she reached over and squeezed his hand gently. "He's not asking for anything," she said softly, "just offering space." They drove past the townhouse and turned into a gated driveway that curved behind it. Jaden's eyes widened as they passed through carefully landscaped gardens, finally stopping in front of a small cottage set apart from the main house. The guest house was simple but beautiful, white painted wood with blue shutters and window boxes full of bright flowers. It looked like something from a storybook, the kind his mother used to read to him before bed. Ms. Ramirez led him up the stone path to the front door, giving him space to move at his own pace. Inside, the cottage was warm and bright, with soft cream-colored walls and comfortable furniture. A small kitchen opened into a living room, and he could see 2 bedrooms down a short hallway. "This one's yours," Ms. Ramirez said, opening the door to a room painted in peaceful blues and grays. "I'll be right next door." Jaden stepped inside, taking in the desk by the window, the bookshelf filled with both children's and young adult titles, the soft-looking bed with its navy comforter. It was more space than he'd had to himself in years. Something on the desk caught his eye, a silver frame holding what looked like an ID badge. His feet carried him forward before he could think about it. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the frame. The badge was old, its edges slightly worn, but the photo was clear. A woman with dark eyes just like his, her smile gentle but determined. Below the photo was printed, "Denise Taylor, Senior Software Engineer." Jaden's fingers traced the glass over his mother's face. Someone here had known her. Someone had kept this, had framed it, had placed it here for him to find. A movement outside the window drew his attention. In the garden below, a small figure in a wheelchair was waving up at him enthusiastically. It was the girl from the fire, Ava, her face bright with recognition and joy. For a long moment, Jaden just stood there, the frame still in his hands, looking down at this little girl who seemed so genuinely happy to see him. Then slowly, feeling like he was crossing some invisible line he couldn't quite name, he raised his hand and waved back. Moonlight spilled through the guest house windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Jaden lay in his new bed, staring at the ceiling, too wired to sleep despite the softness of the mattress and the peaceful quiet. Everything felt surreal. The clean sheets, the gentle hum of the air conditioning, the knowledge that he had a roof over his head that wasn't made of tar paper and stars. After an hour of tossing and turning, he gave up trying to sleep. His bare feet made no sound as he padded across the room, careful not to wake Ms. Ramirez in the next bedroom. The house creaked softly, settling into the night, but it wasn't the threatening sounds of the abandoned hotel. These were gentle, almost welcoming. He paused at the desk where his mother's ID badge sat in its silver frame. In the moonlight, her face looked younger than he remembered, her smile holding a confidence he'd only seen glimpses of when she was alive. His fingers traced the edge of the frame, remembering how she used to hum while she worked on her laptop, lines of code reflecting in her reading glasses. The desk drawer slid open smoothly, and Jaden's breath caught. Inside were stacks of old papers, blueprints with his mother's neat handwriting in the margins, technical diagrams covered in her characteristic red ink corrections. He lifted them carefully, reverently, like archaeologists handling ancient scrolls. Beneath the blueprints lay a folder filled with handwritten notes. His mother's distinctive cursive filled page after page with observations about security systems, encryption protocols, and something called adaptive authentication. He didn't understand most of it, but seeing her handwriting made his chest ache with a familiar emptiness. At the bottom of the drawer, a piece of construction paper caught his eye. It was folded in half like a greeting card, its edges worn soft with age. The outside was decorated with carefully drawn balloons and stars. Inside, in wobbly children's handwriting, was a message that made Jaden's hands tremble. "Dear Mr. Marcus, thank you for keeping my mommy safe and happy birthday. Love, Jaden, age 4. He didn't remember writing it. He didn't remember Marcus. But here was proof that their lives had intersected before, that his mother had trusted this man enough to let her small son make him birthday cards. In the main house, Marcus sat in his home office, multiple screens glowing softly in the darkness. Security camera feeds showed different angles of the property, the gardens, the driveway, the guest house. But he wasn't watching for threats or suspicious activity. His eyes were fixed on the guest house window where a small figure moved past occasionally, a shadow of Denise's son unable to find rest. He clicked through old security footage from years ago, something he'd been doing obsessively since discovering Jaden's identity. There she was, Denise walking through the office hallways, her lab coat pockets stuffed with pens and sticky notes. Denise in the break room teaching other programmers about her latest breakthrough. Denise leaving late one night, a small boy asleep on her shoulder as she carried him to her car. A soft sound from the hallway pulled his attention away from the screens. Ava sat in her wheelchair at the door, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Daddy?" Her voice wavered. "I had the bad dream again about the fire." Marcus moved quickly to her side, kneeling down to her level. "You're safe now, sweetheart. Nothing can hurt you here." "I want ... She hesitated, twisting the hem of her nightgown. "Can we go see Jaden? He made the fire go away last time." Marcus froze. His first instinct was to say no. It was late. They shouldn't disturb him. There were 100 logical reasons why this was a bad idea. But looking at his daughter's frightened face, he remembered another little girl who'd once asked him for help and how he'd failed to give it. "Okay," he said softly, "but just for a few minutes." He lifted Ava from her chair and carried her through the garden path to the guest house. The night air was cool, and she shivered against his chest. At the door, he hesitated again before knocking gently. It opened almost immediately. Jaden stood there in borrowed pajamas that were slightly too big, his dark eyes, so like his mother's, wide with surprise. His gaze moved from Marcus to Ava, who was reaching for him with trembling hands. "You're my fire angel," she said, her voice small but certain. "Daddy said I shouldn't bother you, but I had the bad dream again." Something in Jaden's face softened, a guard dropping that Marcus hadn't even realized was there. Without a word, he stepped back, opening the door wider in silent invitation. Marcus carried Ava inside, following Jaden to the living room. The boy moved with quiet efficiency, grabbing a soft throw blanket from the couch and wrapping it around Ava's shoulders as Marcus set her down. "My mom used to tell me stories when I had bad dreams," Jaden said, his voice gentle. "Want to hear one?" Ava nodded, clutching the blanket close. Marcus started to step back, to give them space, but Jaden's next words stopped him. "It's about a brave little star who got lost from her family," Jaden began, settling onto the couch next to Ava. She was scared at first, being all alone in the big dark sky. But then she realized something amazing. She could shine bright enough to help other lost stars find their way home. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching as his daughter's eyes grew heavy, her body relaxing as Jaden's soft voice continued the story. He recognized it. Denise had told it at the office Christmas party once, when the power had gone out and everyone was panicking about the servers. The little star learned that being lost didn't mean being alone, Jaden continued, adjusting the blanket around Ava's shoulders. Because every time she helped another star, she made a new friend. And soon the sky wasn't dark at all. It was full of light and love and family. Ava's eyes drifted closed, her breathing evening out into the peaceful rhythm of sleep. Jaden's voice trailed off, but he didn't move away. He sat there, this boy who had saved Marcus's daughter twice now, once from fire and once from fear, looking as lost as the little star in his story. Marcus remained in the doorway, silent, watching his daughter sleep peacefully for the first time since the fire. He didn't interrupt. He didn't move. He just stood there, feeling the weight of all the years he'd missed, all the stories he hadn't heard, all the ways he'd failed to keep his promise to Denise. Sunlight streamed through the guest house windows, painting warm squares on the wooden floor. Jaden blinked awake, momentarily confused by the soft bed and clean sheets. The events of last night came back slowly. Ava's visit, the story, falling asleep on the couch before somehow making it back to bed. The smell of bacon and coffee drifted from the kitchen. Ms. Ramirez stood at the stove, humming softly as she flipped pancakes. She turned when Jaden appeared in the doorway, still wearing the borrowed pajamas. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said warmly. "I hope you're hungry. There's orange juice in the fridge if you want some." Jaden couldn't remember the last time someone had made him breakfast. His stomach growled loudly, making Ms. Ramirez laugh. She loaded a plate with pancakes, bacon, and scrambled eggs, setting it at the small kitchen table. "Eat up," she encouraged. "And when you're ready, there's clean clothes in your dresser. Brand new." Through the kitchen window, Jaden could see Ava in the garden. She sat in her wheelchair among the flowers, carefully arranging something on a small table beside her. The morning sun caught her dark curls, making them shine. After inhaling his breakfast and changing into new jeans and a soft blue t-shirt, Jaden stood at the back door watching Ava play. Part of him wanted to stay inside where it was safe, where he didn't have to figure out how to act or what to say. But another part, a stronger part, pulled him toward the garden. Ms. Ramirez gave him a gentle nudge. "Go on. She's been waiting for you to wake up." Inside the main house, Marcus stood at his office window, coffee cup forgotten in his hand as he watched Jaden slowly cross the garden. The boy moved cautiously, like a wild animal unsure of welcome, but Ava's face lit up when she saw him. "Jaden!" she called, waving excitedly. "Come see my collection." As Jaden got closer, he saw what Ava had been arranging. Dozens of small glass animals caught the morning light, creating tiny rainbows on the table's surface. There were elephants with delicate trunks, giraffes with impossibly long necks, tigers with crystalline stripes. "They're beautiful," Jaden said softly, careful not to touch them. "Where did you get them all?" "Different places," Ava explained, picking up a dolphin that seemed to swim in her small hand. "Some are from when I was in the hospital. Some are from my mom before she died, and Daddy brings me new ones when he travels." She studied the collection thoughtfully, then picked up a small lion. Its glass mane caught the sunlight, making it look like it was crowned in fire. "This one reminds me of you." "Me?" Jaden's voice cracked slightly. Ava nodded seriously. "He looks brave, but also kind of lonely. Like maybe he needs a family, but doesn't know how to ask for one." She held out the lion. "You should have him." Jaden stared at the offered gift, his throat tight. "I can't. It's yours." "I want you to have it," Ava insisted. "He'll be happier with you. And maybe you won't feel so lonely anymore." With trembling fingers, Jaden accepted the glass lion. It was warm from the sun and felt solid in his palm, more real than anything had felt in a long time. The morning passed quietly as Ava showed Jaden her garden. She knew the name of every flower, every bush, and she told him stories about each one. Jaden listened, asking questions that made her smile, helping her reach the higher blooms she couldn't get to from her chair. When lunchtime came, Marcus appeared in the garden carrying a tray of sandwiches and lemonade. He set it on the table, carefully moving Ava's glass menagerie aside. "I thought we could eat out here," he said, his voice carefully casual. "If that's okay with you both?" The silence that followed was thick with uncertainty. Jaden glanced at the guest house, considering retreat, but Ava grabbed his hand. "Stay," she whispered. "Please?" They ate quietly at first, the only sounds being the clink of glasses and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Marcus watched Jaden take small, careful bites, like someone used to making food last. "Have you thought about school?" Marcus asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Jaden tensed, his sandwich halfway to his mouth. "Not really, haven't been in 2 years." 2 years? Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. "That must have been hard." Jaden shrugged, but his eyes stayed fixed on his plate. "Couldn't stay in one place long enough, and you need an address to register." Marcus set down his glass, choosing his next words carefully. "We could fix that if you want. There's a good school nearby. Ms. Ramirez could help with the paperwork." Jaden looked up sharply, searching Marcus's face for any sign of a trick or trap, but all he saw was the same careful neutrality, the same measured offer of choice. "I'm probably way behind," Jaden said softly. "We'll get you tutors," Marcus replied. "Whatever you need, but only if you want it." Ava reached across the table and took Jaden's hand again. "You could ride to school with me. I start next month too." The rest of lunch passed with less tension. They talked about simple things: the weather, the gardens, Ava's physical therapy progress. When the plates were empty, Jaden helped clear the table, then excused himself to the guest house. In his room, he took out the glass lion Ava had given him. He placed it carefully next to his mother's photo on the nightstand, adjusting it until the sunlight hit it just right. The crystal mane blazed with color, casting tiny rainbows across his mother's smiling face. "I think you'd like it here, Mom," he whispered, touching the frame gently. "I think maybe this is what you wanted for me all along." The lion stood guard beside the photo, its glass eyes seeming to watch over both Jaden and the memory of his mother. It wasn't much, just a small piece of crystal shaped like an animal, but it felt like the first real thing he'd owned in years. The first thing freely given with no expectations attached. Days settled into a gentle rhythm at the Wynn estate. Each morning, as the sun painted the garden in soft gold, Ava's wheelchair would appear on the path to the guest house. She'd knock 3 times, always 3, and wait for Jaden to answer. They shared breakfast together at the small kitchen table, Ms. Ramirez making pancakes or eggs while Ava chattered about her dreams or her latest physical therapy achievements. Jaden mostly listened, but his responses grew longer each day, like winter ice slowly thawing. After breakfast, Ms. Ramirez would take Jaden to various appointments: doctors, dentists, paperwork meetings. She kept a careful folder of everything they needed for school enrollment: birth certificate copies, medical records, guardian forms that made her temporarily responsible for his care. "How are you feeling about all this?" she asked during one of their walks between appointments. They'd stopped for ice cream, sitting on a park bench in the late summer warmth. Jaden licked his chocolate cone thoughtfully. "It's weird," he admitted. "Having people care about stuff. Like if I'm healthy or if I can read okay." "You deserve to have people care," Ms. Ramirez said quietly. "You know that, right?" He shrugged, but his eyes weren't as guarded as they used to be. "Maybe. It's just different." The afternoons usually found Jaden and Ava in the garden. She taught him the names of flowers, and he helped her reach the higher branches of the apple tree when she wanted to check if the fruit was ripe. Sometimes they just sat quietly, Ava drawing in her sketchbook while Jaden read from the pile of books Ms. Ramirez had brought him to help catch up on schoolwork. It was during one of these peaceful afternoons that Marcus appeared in the garden. He carried a leather photo album and wore an expression Jaden hadn't seen before, something between determination and uncertainty. "Ava, sweetheart," Marcus called softly. "Could you give us a few minutes?" Ava looked between them, then nodded. "I need to practice my piano anyway," she said, but squeezed Jaden's hand before wheeling herself inside. Marcus sat on the garden bench beside Jaden, placing the album between them. "I've been wanting to tell you something," he began. "About your mother." Jaden's body tensed, but he didn't move away. The afternoon sun felt suddenly too warm on his skin. "I met Denise 12 years ago," Marcus continued, opening the album. "She was working late at the office. She was one of our best programmers. I was leaving through the back alley, not paying attention to my surroundings. 2 men approached me with knives." He turned a page, revealing a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Tech CEO Assault Thwarted." "Your mother," Marcus's voice softened. "She saw what was happening. She could have called the police and stayed inside. Instead, she ran out with the building's fire extinguisher, sprayed both men in the face, grabbed my arm, and pulled me to safety." Jaden stared at the article, his finger tracing his mother's name in the small print. He remembered her telling him once that sometimes bravery meant acting before you had time to be scared. "Why didn't you look for her?" Jaden's question came out barely above a whisper. "When she left." Marcus closed the album slowly. "I thought she'd left to protect you," he admitted. "Her resignation letter mentioned keeping her son safe. I assumed, wrongly, that she was running from something dangerous. I didn't want to risk bringing trouble back to her door." "She was sick," Jaden said, his voice tight. "That's what she was running from. She didn't want anyone to see her weak." The silence that settled between them was different now, less like a wall and more like a shared understanding. Marcus nodded slowly. "Your mother was the strongest person I've ever known," he said. "And I see that same strength in you. The way you ran into that fire without hesitation. That's pure Denise Taylor." Jaden picked at a loose thread on his jeans, fighting the burn behind his eyes. She used to say being brave wasn't about not being scared. It was about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. She was right, Marcus agreed softly. "And Jaden? What you did for Ava. That was the right thing. The bravest thing." That night, after a quiet dinner in the guest house with Ms. Ramirez, Jaden lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. The glass lion caught moonlight on his nightstand, casting tiny prisms across his mother's photo. Sleep came slowly, and with it dreams of smoke and flame, but this time the nightmare shifted. As he moved through the burning hallway, Ava's small hand found his, warm and steady, and there, at the edge of the dream, his mother stood watching. Her smile was proud, her nod gentle but firm, the same way she used to look at him when he'd done something right, something brave. When he woke, the first rays of dawn were painting the sky. 3 knocks sounded at his door. Ava, right on time, ready to start another day. The physical therapy room in the Wynn house looked more like a small gym, with soft mats covering the floor and various equipment lining the walls. Late morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, warming the space where Ava sat in her wheelchair. Determination etched on her young face. "Would you like to watch, Jaden?" she asked, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I'm learning new exercises today." Jaden nodded, settling into a cushioned chair near the corner. He'd never seen physical therapy before, but something in Ava's eyes told him she wanted him there. The therapist, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, helped Ava onto a padded table. "Today we're going to work on those core muscles," she explained, demonstrating a new movement that required Ava to lift her upper body while keeping her legs stable. Ava's face scrunched with effort as she tried to follow along. Once, twice, 3 times she attempted the exercise, but her muscles trembled and gave out each time. Frustration clouded her features. "I can't," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It's too hard." The therapist started to offer encouragement, but Jaden was already moving. He pulled his chair closer to the table, sitting where Ava could see him clearly. "Hey," he said softly, the way his mother used to speak to him when things got tough. "Want to hear a story?" Ava nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "When I was 7, I was staying at this shelter downtown," Jaden began, his voice steady and calm. They had these old bunk beds, really tall ones. I was on the top bunk, and one night the ladder broke while I was climbing down. Ava's eyes widened. Did it hurt? Like crazy, Jaden admitted. Broke my arm in 2 places, but you know what? Nobody was there to help me up. The night staff was changing shifts, other kids were asleep, so I got up by myself. How? Ava asked, momentarily forgetting her own struggles. Because nobody else was going to do it for me, Jaden said simply. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the pain. It's deciding you're stronger than what's trying to keep you down. From the doorway, Marcus watched silently, his presence unnoticed by the children. Ava looked at the ceiling, then back at Jaden. Did you cry? Yeah, he said honestly. But crying doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're feeling something real hard. The brave part is what you do next. Ava took a deep breath, determination replacing the tears in her eyes. Okay, she said to Sarah. I want to try again. This time, when she attempted the exercise, Jaden counted softly with her. 1, 2, 3. Her arms shook, but she held the position. When she finally lay back down, her smile could have lit up the whole room. You did it, Sarah praised, but Ava was looking at Jaden. Thank you, she whispered, for telling me about your arm. After the session, as Sarah helped Ava back into her wheelchair, Marcus stepped into the room. Ava, honey, would you mind if I borrowed Jaden for a few minutes? Ava wheeled herself toward the door. Only if you promise to give him back, she said with a grin, then added more seriously, he's good at helping people be brave. Once they were alone, Marcus gestured for Jaden to sit with him on a bench near the windows. Sunlight painted patterns on the floor between them. I've been wanting to tell you something, Marcus began, his voice carrying a weight Jaden hadn't heard before. About your mother, Denise. Jaden's hands clasped together in his lap, but he didn't look away. She wasn't just someone who worked for me or even just the person who saved my life that night, Marcus continued. Denise was one of the best people I've ever known. She had this way of seeing right through problems to their solutions, not just with code or computers, but with people too. He paused, choosing his words carefully. And you, Jaden, you remind me of her in every way that matters. The way you think, how you solve problems, your instinct to protect others. It's pure Denise. Jaden's throat felt tight, but he managed to ask, how? The fire, for one, Marcus said. But it's more than that. It's how you just helped Ava. How you tell stories to make hard things easier to face. That was your mother's gift too. Marcus turned slightly to face Jaden directly. I want to offer you something, and I want you to know you have a real choice here. You can stay with us permanently. We'd make it official, legal. Or, if you prefer, I can make sure you have everything you need to start fresh somewhere else. School, housing, whatever you need to build the life you want. Either way, no strings attached. Jaden stood up slowly, his mind whirling with possibilities. Without a word, he walked out of the therapy room and into the garden. The morning sun was high now, warming the flowers Ava had taught him to name. He made his way to the small decorative table where Ava kept her collection of glass animals. The little lion she'd given him sat there, catching the light. He picked it up carefully, holding it so the sunlight streamed through its crystalline body, casting tiny rainbows on his hands. Behind him, Marcus waited quietly, giving him space to think. Jaden turned the lion in his hands, watching the light dance through it. Finally, his voice barely above a whisper but steady and sure, he said, I want to stay. But not because I need saving, just because she would have liked it here too. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of Marcus's home office, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. The room felt different today, less like a billionaire's workspace and more like a place where important promises were made. Ms. Ramirez sat in one of the leather chairs, her usual warm smile tempered by professional focus. Beside her, Jaden perched on the edge of his seat, his shoulders straight but not tense. Marcus stood behind his desk, carefully arranging a stack of documents. Unlike his usual business meetings, He wore a simple blue sweater instead of a suit. It made him look more approachable, more human. "I wanted us to do this properly," Marcus began, his voice gentle but clear. "These papers represent different options, Jaden. Each one matters, and each one gives you choices." He spread the documents across the desk's surface, neat stacks of legal papers, educational forms, and guardianship applications. Each stack had colored tabs marking important sections, making them less intimidating. "This first set," Ms. Ramirez explained, pointing to the blue-tabbed papers, "establishes legal guardianship. It means Marcus would be responsible for your care and well-being, but it's not the same as adoption. Think of it as a bridge, one you can cross at your own pace." Jaden leaned forward slightly, his eyes scanning the documents. "What exactly does it mean? Day to day?" Marcus pulled his chair closer to the desk. "It means you have a legal right to be here, to education, healthcare, and stability. But it also means you have the power to change your mind. You can walk away if this isn't what you want." A soft breeze carried the sound of Ava's laughter through the window. She was outside in the garden, surrounded by art supplies and creativity. "And the guest house?" Jaden asked, his voice quiet but steady. "Can I keep staying there?" "Of course," Marcus nodded. "That space is yours. Your quiet mornings, your privacy, none of that has to change." "And my mom's photo?" "Everything that's yours stays yours," Marcus assured him. "We're not here to take anything away, Jaden. We're here to add possibilities." Ms. Ramirez reached into her bag and pulled out a folder of her own. "I've reviewed everything from a child welfare perspective. The guardianship arrangement is solid. It protects your rights while giving you stability. But I want you to understand something important." She leaned forward, making sure she had Jaden's full attention. "This isn't about rushing into a new family. It's about creating a safe space where you can decide what family means to you. There's no pressure to call anyone anything you're not ready for. No pressure to be anyone except yourself." Jaden nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of the nearest document. "And school?" Marcus slid forward another set of papers with green tabs. "We've looked at several options. There's a small private school nearby with experience helping students catch up after gaps in education. They have a good support system, small classes, but we can also look at other schools if you prefer." Through the window, they could see Ava in her wheelchair, armed with washable paints and determination. She was decorating the garden wall, her strokes bold and colorful despite their unevenness. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated on forming letters. "What's she writing?" Jaden asked, momentarily distracted. They all turned to look. In large, wobbly letters, Ava had painted the word family across the wall. "She's been planning that all morning," Marcus said softly. "Wouldn't let anyone help her with the spelling." Jaden stood up and walked to the window, watching as Ava finished the last letter. She looked up, spotted him watching, and waved enthusiastically, gesturing for him to come outside. "Go ahead," Ms. Ramirez said. "The papers can wait a few minutes." Jaden stepped out into the garden, approaching Ava and her artistic creation. She held out a paintbrush to him, her face bright with excitement. "Do you want to add something?" she asked. "It needs more decorations." Jaden took the brush, studying the wall. The letters were imperfect, but somehow more beautiful for their wobbles and uneven spacing. Without hesitation, he dipped the brush in orange paint and carefully drew a small flame beneath the word. Back in the office, Marcus and Ms. Ramirez watched through the window as the two children added more details to their wall art. "He's going to be okay, isn't he?" Marcus asked quietly. "He already is," Ms. Ramirez replied. "He just needs people who see that." When Jaden returned to the office, small spots of paint on his hands, he sat down with new purpose. He pulled the guardianship papers closer and began to read, taking his time with each line. No one rushed him. No one spoke. They simply let him process each word at his own pace. Finally, Jaden looked up. "Where do I sign?" Ms. Ramirez pointed to the marked lines explaining each one. "This acknowledges the guardianship. This one is for school enrollment. And this one is for medical care." Jaden picked up the pen Marcus offered. His hand was steady as he began to sign, but he didn't rush. Each letter was carefully formed, as if he wanted to make sure every stroke carried the weight of his decision. It wasn't a flourish or a scribble, it was deliberate, chosen, owned. When he finished the last signature, Marcus didn't move to hug him or make a big gesture. Instead, he simply placed a hand on Jaden's shoulder, the touch light but solid. "Your mom would be proud," Marcus said softly. Jaden looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd known each other, his eyes were completely clear of shadows. "I think so too." The school gymnasium buzzed with quiet energy as parents, teachers, and students filled the rows of folding chairs. Handmade posters about disability awareness decorated the walls, and a small stage had been set up at the front, complete with a wooden podium and microphone. Jaden stood behind the podium, his hands gripping its edges. He wore a clean button-down shirt, dark blue, carefully ironed, but his sneakers were still his trusted old ones. Beside him, Ava sat in her wheelchair, wearing a flowery dress and a bright smile. Her small hand reached up to hold his, giving it a gentle squeeze. The gymnasium lights felt warm on his face as he looked out at the crowd. His heart thumped against his ribs, but Ava's presence anchored him. He took a deep breath and leaned toward the microphone. "My name is Jaden," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "And I want to tell you about a night that changed everything." The audience settled, their attention fixed on the small figure behind the podium. In the back row, Marcus sat quietly, his usual business attire replaced by casual clothes that helped him blend in with the other parents. "Most people think the story starts with the fire," Jaden continued, "but it really began long before that. It began with empty streets and quiet rooftops, with learning which dumpsters might have bottles to recycle, and which shop owners wouldn't chase you away if you sat in their doorway during rain." A hush fell over the gymnasium. Even the youngest children seemed to sense the weight of his words. "I used to think being alone meant being strong," he said, his voice growing more confident. "I slept under tarps when it rained. I learned which buildings had broken fire hose valves where I could get water. I thought I didn't need anyone." Ava's hand tightened around his. She looked up at him with understanding beyond her years, her presence a silent reminder that he wasn't alone anymore. "Then one night I smelled smoke," Jaden continued, "and I saw it coming from a window across the street. I didn't think about being brave. I didn't think about being a hero. I just knew someone was trapped, and for once I could do something that mattered." He glanced down at Ava, who nodded encouragingly. "But here's what I learned that night and every day since then. Sometimes people don't need to be rescued. Sometimes they just need to be seen. Really seen. Not as something broken or something to fix, but as someone whole and complete, just waiting for a chance to show it." Teachers in the front row dabbed at their eyes with tissues. A parent near the middle hugged their child closer. "I thought I was saving someone else that night," Jaden said, his voice growing softer. "But the truth is, that fire led me to people who saw me, really saw me. Not as a homeless kid, not as someone to pity, but as someone who belonged somewhere, someone who mattered." The silence in the gymnasium was complete now, every person hanging on his words. "And that's why I'm here today," he continued, standing straighter. "Because everyone in this room deserves to be seen that way. Whether you're in a wheelchair like my friend Ava, or sleeping on a rooftop like I used to, or just feeling invisible in your own life, you matter. Your story matters." As Jaden finished speaking, the applause started slowly, then built into a wave that filled the gymnasium. Ava beamed up at him, clapping the loudest of all. After the applause died down, Marcus approached the stage. He wasn't alone. Behind him walked a tall man in a firefighter's dress uniform, his badge gleaming under the gymnasium lights. "Jaden," Marcus said into the microphone, "I'd like you to meet someone. This is Lieutenant Rodriguez. He was first on the scene the night of the fire." The firefighter stepped forward, his face kind but serious. "We don't often meet the heroes who act before we arrive," he said, his voice carrying through the gym. "But that night, you did something extraordinary. Not just the rescue, though that was remarkable, but the courage to care when others might have looked away." From his pocket, he pulled out something that caught the light, a medal, but not an official one. It was clearly handcrafted, possibly by the fire crew themselves. The metal was polished to a shine, and engraved words curved around its surface, "Honor beyond age." "This isn't an official commendation," Lieutenant Rodriguez explained, placing it carefully in Jaden's hands. "It's something special we made, because sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from the most unexpected places." Jaden stared at the medal, turning it over in his hands. The medal felt warm, real, like a piece of truth he could hold. Later that night, back in his guest house, Jaden stood before the shelf where he kept his most important possessions. His mother's photo sat in its frame, her smile as bright as ever. Next to it perched the glass lion Ava had given him, catching the last rays of sunset through the window. Carefully, he placed the medal between them, not above or below, but alongside, as if completing a story told in 3 parts. "Jaden!" Ava's voice carried through the open window, full of excitement. "Come out! The fireflies are starting!" He moved to the window and saw her in the garden, her wheelchair weaving between the flower beds as she chased the first fireflies of evening. Her laughter echoed across the lawn, infectious and free. From the main house, Marcus watched through his study window, hands in his pockets, a quiet smile on his face. He made no move to join them or to supervise. He simply observed, understanding that some moments belong purely to those living them. Jaden raced out to join Ava, his feet carrying him swiftly across the grass. She squealed with delight as she spun her chair, staying just ahead of him, her hair flying in the evening breeze. And then it happened, something that had been building like a dawn breaking. Jaden laughed, not the quiet chuckle he'd sometimes let slip, not the polite response to a joke. This was real laughter, deep and full, bursting from him like a song finally remembered. It rang through the garden, matching Ava's joy note for note. "The fire took everything," he had said once in darker days. But now, watching Ava chase fireflies, feeling the warmth of his new home behind him, seeing Marcus's protective presence in the window, he realized something else. It also lit the way. If you enjoyed the story of Jaden and Marcus, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.